Okay, hello guys. Today is the 2nd of July 2023. By the looks of the map, you might guess that today I'm actually recording a video about what's happening in Ukraine. So, like I said, I'm not a great YouTuber. It's more of like my diary of my thoughts and things. But I'm also trying to give a slightly different view of things because, how do I put it? Because this is trying to be more analytical about things, like, predict what's gonna happen, look at what's happening and try to give a view. It's like a couple of things I've been saying before, I'm gonna mention them today, and essentially they come into be. They literally come into happen. So at the moment, first thing, something crazy that Russians did a few weeks ago, which is blowing up a dam in the Kahovka here. Right, they blew up a dam causing a flood all over these areas, like quite far, causing hundreds of civilian deaths. And like many people go like, hey, it's like, this is insane, why would they do this? Why would they do this for the areas which they call their own and things like this? Overall, people who know history a little bit, at least the military history a bit more, they will always remember a phrase. I'm quoting from memory. It was, when we arrived to the river, we have seen bodies of enemy soldiers drowned, floating down the current in the river, which have flooded the areas because they did not know that the flood was coming. Right, that is a quote by memory. Is like, when I read it it was a book by a German soldier. It was, I think, a tank soldier, like, not off the top of my head. It's like a long time since I read it, but this phrase stuck to me. And when he was describing this was when they arrived to a Dnieper River, and the Russians have, the Soviet command during World War II have blew up a dam which was over here somewhere, like, near Kiev. They blew up this dam and they tried to flood so that they could slow down the progression of the German advance and not to keep them away from crossing the Dnieper River. Is what they have done, though, is they have not notified other civilian population, know their own units. So many Red Army units have died many people from Red Army units have died in that flood. So exactly the same thing has happened here as well. So as well as a lot of civilians, like people who had zero warning, obviously, about any of that, but also, according to Ukrainian sources that they were mentioning the radio talks, they were saying that some units which had the tanks or something like this, they'd be told to move back, but the units who did not have any sort of military valuable technology there, they were essentially left to drown. So again, Ukrainians will probably work out how many civilians have died in that flood over the time. Obviously, people are still kind of wondering about the sanity of people who's done it, but we will never know about the amount of Russian soldiers that have died in that flood. So that is something which people don't pay attention to. But I read this, I tried to quote that line from the German soldier's book, but to be honest, I have to say that I'm not as surprised as many people were for Russians doing this. I'm going to tell you why. I'm gonna open up and Krasnodar flood. I think it's 2012. Yeah, so yes. So Krasnodar floods, this is where it was. And what happened there, yes, so this is not far from Ukraine as far as I remember. Well, yeah, it's not far from Ukraine. And essentially what happened there was that the local government, they had a dam, they had a few days of rain, and then there was a river, there was a big dam on it, and there was like the water built up. It didn't happen overnight, it happened over like a couple of weeks of rains or something like this. I'm not gonna say exactly everything. It's like it was 2012, but it was like a few days to a couple of weeks of like rains, not super heavy, but like. And as the water was building up in the dam, like they had a release valve towards a ravine, which would take the water, you know, to a safe space, as people like to say these days. So which would move the water towards, like, away from the dam, safely away from the people. But what happened, it was Putin's dacha, against all the rules and regulations. The Putin's dacha has been built in that ravine, like at some point of time. So the local government has essentially decided, fuck the people who live in that area, they can all go piss off, because no way we can destroy Putin's dacha. Right, and essentially they've released the water from the dam going down, and nobody was given any warning. So again, hundreds of people dead, few hundreds missing, lots of injured, houses destroyed, properties destroyed, right? Everything just to save Putin's dacha, right? So when people remember something like this, you go like, okay, you know, blowing up a dam in Kahovka just to kill a few Ukrainians and to stop them from moving to the, like, you know, from moving across the river and actually attacking from another direction. Well, doesn't seem like a long stretch. But, you know, this is something like, again, this is why I'm doing these videos. Those are the things that many commentators, they don't remember, they don't see, they don't know, because a lot of commentators, they're doing either very short videos just kind of covering the current affairs, but also a lot of commentators who do it in English, like, or other languages, mostly in English, the ones that I hear, they don't know this stuff. Like, most of them don't speak Russian or Ukrainian, like I said, and they don't really mention any of this, because for them this is like the current affairs, but for them that area, they never really cared about this. All they cared about was what was the, you know, Putin said or something like this, but it was never what actually was happening on the ground in that country, right? And quite often this is what the lack of knowledge of the local, you know, history, culture, language, other things, that what brings that kind of modern, you see like commentators saying like, oh look, why don't like Ukrainians just move, you know, go and join Russia again? It's like, that's why Ukrainians don't want to join Russia again. When something like this happened in Ukraine in a much lesser like capacity, people did go to jail, right? It wasn't nice, you know. It's like, yes, many people who were guilty in that, like, there was something happened in Karpaty, in the mountains, right? There was like a big issue, and some people did get arrested, you know. It's like, in Russia, when the people were out, like, you know, the police were asked, the head of police was like asked, like, look guys, you knew that was gonna happen, you had like hours of warning, if not a day worth of warning, why did you not warn other people? And the head of police answered, that was a very interesting answer, it's like, what we were supposed to do, go and knock on their doors? Like, you know, like, yeah, you know, our job is to keep people safe, you know. Did you really expect us to go and do our job? Knock on people's doors and say, hey, there is a problem with the dam that you don't know about. You're not gonna get any warning. You have to pack your shit and go. Otherwise, you have a big chance of dying. No, we're not gonna do that. Right, so that was the case of, like I say, 2012. So that's like 10 years ago. 10 years ago, Ukrainians were sending blankets to that area because there's a lot of family connections. This is Krasnodar. This area is actually, like I say, it's not far from Ukraine, and yeah, there's rainfall. According to the reports, rainfall equivalent to 3 or 4 months worth of precipitation in the typical year. So there we go. According to reports, there was like a rainfall, and they just dropped the water onto the people. But they did have a fair bit of warning. They had a few hours warning at least, and the police simply just ignored it. They didn't even bother like driving along the villages and like having this loudspeaker and say, hey guys, there's a problem coming, you need to get out. No, that did not happen. So the entire town was Krimsk, was pretty much washed over the face of a planet. Right? So us even many Ukrainians probably forgot about this, but I was like, yeah, that sounds familiar. So, you don't have to look for Russians killing normal people. Yeah, there is in the Second World War, all you have to do is just look within the last 20 years and see how many times stuff like this happened, and you go dam blowing up a dam and killing hundreds of civilians, destroying property. That doesn't seem beyond them even during the 21st fucking century, right? We're not talking we're not talking war times. We're talking peace times, just to keep the Putin's dacha safe. Right, but like I said, it's not far from Ukraine. There is a lot of connections. I think I had some friends definitely in that region. Some of people I knew had relatives there. So it's that's kind of, this is why at the point of time, many people from Ukraine were sending aid there, literally because of the blood connections and things like this. Right, so let's go back to the map. Right, obviously that has caused a lot of damage to the civilian infrastructure, but it's kind of interesting because we talked about this, because now we're going to talk about the military situations. At the moment, obviously, Ukraine is trying to attack. I mean, if you watched some of my videos before, I talked about that Ukraine really needs to doesn't just need, but will probably be going, when it becomes a big counteroffensive, down this kind of square like Vasilyevka, Melitopol, right, and then going to Berdyansk and Gulay-Polye or Velika Novosilka, right? I was saying that there might be a chance of them kind of going towards Mariupol, but to be honest, I was saying this square here, Arikhiv, so this line here, as you can see where I'm drawing it, I should have probably made a picture of this, but this square here is the most likely place where Ukrainians gonna try and come in, because here they don't really have to go that far in, so they don't need to fight for Melitopol or Berdyansk. All they have to do is just go deep enough so that the artillery can close these roads, right? So long as they're deep enough so that artillery, they're already kind of doing a lot of damage to the Russian military infrastructure in the south of Ukraine, so they can literally just go from here. Once they go down, they go to around the city. They don't have to capture any major cities or anything like this. As long as they have the positions to control the roads and the railways with the artillery strikes and maybe some HIMARS systems, they can essentially stop the Russians from controlling this area. The Russians will have to leave essentially simply because they're gonna run out of bullets. Right, but from the military point of view, we already heard that Russians have evacuated the nuclear station. So there is a talk that they might blow it up, literally not the actual nuclear station, but there is also a storage facility, nuclear and fuel storage facility. They might blow that up just to cause more damage and to make sure that people kind of have to move off, simply just to destroy the area, simply just to do the damage. And they will probably say, hey, Ukrainians have launched a dozen HIMARS systems at this place, like the way what they tried to talk about when they were talking about the explosion in Kahovka. They said, look, there's like so many Ukrainian rockets then flew in that place and just blew it up like momentarily, like one big explosion. It's like, yeah, we believe you guys. But there's one thing which happened with this, like when they blew up the dam, what they did destroy, lots of civilian, but they also destroyed, they had the defense, all their defense here. It's essentially a lot of it got washed away. So the trenches got washed down, leveled with the ground. Their minefields, obviously, you have a lot of water moving, it picks everything up, because the mines, they're anti-human, anti-people mines, so they're not really dug in 5 meters underground. They're essentially hidden just on the top level of the ground, so they literally you don't want your mine too deep. So when you have a big wave of water coming, which is also carrying everything like mud, trees, whatever else, a lot of that shit just gets washed away, right? So downstream, from here, if you can see my mouse moving, and all the way down towards the Black Sea, all the way kind of from there and down, right? You see that happening. So these defense, at least the first line of defenses essentially got washed away. It's got destroyed. Right, so now again something I've mentioned before, because this area, once the water went down, it took a while, but it went down. There is still a lot of little islands there. There's a lot of areas which are now more accessible for Ukrainian. We're not talking general troops. We're talking about small units, just zipping through, finding spots where they can actually finding places where they can keep track of where the Russians are trying to rebuild their defense lines. There's been talk about fighting with Ukrainian soldiers on this side, on the left bank of the Dnieper River, near the city, near the town of Lashki, which is essentially, it used to be Hola Pristan, I think, right? But it has been renamed. Oh no, Hola Pristan Setut. This is Hola Pristan, Lashki. So, and around this area, there's been notifications of people, Russian and Ukrainian soldiers fighting. There has been also notes of Ukrainians fighting on this side of the river as well, over here near Kahovka. Against sightings and fighting noticed by Russian soldiers. Essentially, the Ukrainian small units, they're managing, because obviously the defense line is washed off, so there's no mines. Well, there are mines, but try finding them now, it's like a disaster area. right? But it's also like no forward posts, like properly equipped forward posts for the Russians, so they cannot really keep track of the river. So Ukrainians finding the ways, like, you know, small units. Obviously, we're talking like something like special forces, or at least well enough trained units that can walk in a small unit, make their way across the river. We talked about, like, you know, them being a lot of islands here as well. So making their way across the river, keeping track of where Russians are and what they're doing, and, you know, doing target spotting as well. So, which means that if Russians try to bring in their like equipment, try to bring ammunition anywhere close, the Ukrainians can spot it. And because the right bank of the Dnieper River is actually higher, like by, I don't know, a few dozen meters, so like 30-40 meters higher. And if you have an artillery unit sitting there, it essentially not only like the fact that Ukrainians are not only using the Soviet artillery units, they're also using Western artillery units, but it also means that even the Soviet artillery units, you know, if you put those who know like physics and stuff like this, you know, you put your artillery units like 30 meters higher than the meter, then it's essentially like what, not 50 meters, but 30-40 meters higher than the one below. So all of a sudden you've got another, like, I don't know, kilometer, 2 kilometers further that you can shoot. You know, it's like then the other guys. Which means that the Russians cannot really bring in their artillery close enough anymore, because beforehand they had all the prepared positions. Well, now all that is gone. You know, it's like, yes, they can have the artillery units here, but because they don't have the spotting places and they don't have any defense sort of like lines here, Ukrainian soldiers can actually sit through and become the spotters and the targeting units to allow Ukrainian artillery probably hit the Russian artillery. So they're having some problems there. So we will not put it past Ukrainians, although the Ukrainian commentators at the moment say like, look, you know, we wouldn't do this because of that and that, but we would probably not gonna put it past Ukrainians, their ability to actually organize the crossing down here. This is where there used to be a bridge, but to organize a crossing across the river and to actually start fighting through there. Essentially through the ability, through having some Western artillery, but also like having the advantage in the height of the different in the heights, and advantage of being able to send in spotter units which can actually tell the artillery where to shoot. Right. The same happens here. Like again, like we said, that the Russians have lost. We don't know how many soldiers they have lost, but we probably could say hundreds. You know, not thousands, but definitely dozens or hundreds of soldiers. Right. And the other thing which they have done is essentially, this used to be a lot of water, and we already seen at least I've seen some commentators talking about the fact that, like, oh my god, the Ukrainians have found, like, you know, a new secret passageway like across the thing, because all the water is gone obviously now. And then what happened is physics have happened, and as over the, like, you know, last few weeks there wasn't really a lot of rain in Ukraine and things like this, you know, that area has started to become dry. And you can't still move, it's not dry enough for you to move tanks across, but it is dry enough, and because there is no real strong defensive positions here, right? So they did something, but there's no real strong defensive positions, because that used to be a safe spot. So now people can actually make their way across again. No minefields, nothing like this. Maybe some units standing here will keep in watch, but well-trained groups can slowly go through and kind of walk their way through the places and maybe hide somewhere during the day, move during the night, but again become the spotters become the people who can tell the artillery where to shoot, become, drive the targets for maybe like some rockets to be shot at them. Like that's probably already happening. So will there be like a moment when the Ukrainian military will say, hey, actually we can drive a bunch of like, maybe not tanks, maybe something lighter than a tank, but we can drive some vehicles across that ground. It's probably not going to happen in the next couple of weeks or so, but it will happen, right? So at this point of time, this is the situations, and Ukrainians are trying to get into that area to stop the ammunition and supplies going through from here to here. But also something I've mentioned before is that if you get down to, for example, between Melitopol and Berdyansk, if you get down, like pass through there and manage to kind of move the soldiers through there, all of a sudden you have essentially a straight line to hit the Crimean bridge. So at the moment, Ukrainian has already, I think, received a few missiles that can strike that distance. They also produced the new missiles, which, again, land-to-land kind of missiles, which can fly themselves this distance. They're probably not as good as HIMARS, so I don't know yet. I only heard people say, yeah, Ukrainians have something but essentially if Ukrainians kind of go down through the square without this square, so yeah, Vasilievka, Polohe, Berdyansk, Melitopol, yeah, and they just don't bother with the big cities and essentially kind of zip through to these areas. They have a straight through shot, like literally straight line from here to the bridge. So they can essentially, again, have a very good chance of slowing down and stopping the Russian supplies on this bridge, because again, it's a very limited area. Because with something we talked about where people said, oh, somebody blew up the bridge, I personally don't think anybody blew the bridge up. I think it's because it wasn't built properly. Right, over time, the holding, do we have that thing open? Right, Crimean bridge. Crimean War. No. Let's look it up. Yeah, so essentially, yeah, what we see, there was an explosion there, but personally I don't think that was an explosion of a bomb or anything like this. What I think is those holding things, right, so, right, these have actually moved, like, slightly, but obviously if you do this slight move of, like, they can take so much and then the pressure just builds up and then they just break down and fall apart. So I think that's what happened, because they still have not properly repaired the railway bridge from what I hear. Right? So this part of the bridge has not been fully repaired yet, so the trains have to go very, very slowly. Right, so like that's one explosion. No matter how big the bomb is, the kind of damage it has caused, I think the explosion was the result, not the cause of the bridge collapse. But that's my personal opinion. So like I'm not saying I'm 100% right. Just to say people would like to be a success of some military operation. Fine, good with that. But like I said, this means that the supplies trains go very slow across the bridge, and they can only go as far, from what I've heard from sources, they can only go across one. Let's look at this one. Yeah, okay, where's that other photo? Yeah. So if we open this photo in a new tab, and we go closer. Right, if you can see, there's two rail lines, and apparently the supplies can only go through one rail line. So they already rebuilt apparently part of the road bridge, but they essentially have to kind of use one rail line. They can't go very fast, or they have to run convoys across the roadways. So it's not helping the supply lines, but if Ukrainians have a direct shot at this makes the supplies of Russian troops a lot harder. Okay? So what other news? Obviously people talked about all the equipment that has been supplied by the West, like the tanks, the people carriers. Yes, it's all good. Ukrainians still have problems with like air-to-air kind of fighting, because Ukrainians don't have enough planes. Russians already using kind of a lot of their planes. They're losing a lot. They have lost some helicopters and a couple of planes in the last well, it wasn't a revolution, it was kind of a weird thing that happened. We're going to talk about that. I'm going to kind of cover that area, but essentially Ukrainians at the moment saying, look, if we want to advance faster, because they're doing it's a very slow progress. Russians are very well dug in there, like they had months to prepare. Obviously, if I could guess that Ukrainians gonna probably go somewhere here, so could the Russians. Yes, they have left their flanks kind of open here, but it also it's still, the land is still not dry enough yet, so they're probably trying to dig in something in there, at least something. We shall see that, but what Ukrainians were saying is they need some ways of dealing with Russian aviation, because the Russian aviation does strikes, obviously they're not fully flying into Ukrainian territory, but they do strikes from their own territory under the protection of their anti-air defenses. Right, Ukrainians do not have a lot of fighter planes, but for this I have actually met some guys recently. It was an interesting meeting. It was in Berlin. I just bumped into people and random conversation with some guys who are apparently analysts for that center that takes decisions on how to help Ukraine, and we did talk about airplanes, and something I talked about, we're gonna go to this, oh, the secret passage has opened. Yes, something I talked about. Yeah, so this is the Russian dude. He's one of the people who commentates on that kind of war, and he was like, look, Ukrainians have found a way of crossing place where it used to be water. Well, it wasn't so the passage we talked about is, but this is something I was going to talk about. Yeah, we talked about the cost, obviously, support, but at one of my videos, yes, this one, right, I was saying that Ukraine doesn't really need F-16s. I was talking about A-29 Super Tucano as one of the alternatives, or any other particular, similar alternatives, where I was saying, look, what Ukraine needs is something which is more simple, more can use more airports. And when we're talking with these guys, they're kind of a couple. They've been in Berlin because we had a bank holiday weekend, so I don't know if somebody's watching, you don't know what it is. Essentially, is when they give, because of some national holiday, you have a long weekend. So we had a long weekend. They were in Berlin for that time, and we had an interesting conversation. And when we started talking about airplanes, I said, look guys, why bother with F-16s? Obviously Ukraine needs them at some point of time, but you can use something like this. And they were like, well, what about this and that, and actually fighting? And I was like, look guys, these missiles, as long as you have an airplane who can that can carry a missile that can be directed through from the ground or from the airplane, but from a long distance missiles, because same stuff I basically said in that video was like, look, you know, we fight beyond planes now, fight from beyond visual range, right? As long as you can find the Russian plane, but you have the missile which can make it there, like, you know, so like they say that the Russian planes, they see Ukrainian planes a bit sooner, okay, but Ukrainian planes will like having the upgrades, so only the newest Russian planes can actually compete with Ukrainian planes. But they can, like, you know, start, because the Russians started using the newest planes, and they have the missiles that can fly in and knock the plane out. So Ukrainians are struggling with that, and I was saying, look guys, as long as you have the planes which are capable of small, you know, easy to capture by plane radar, but are capable of carrying the air-to-air missiles that can hit the targets from the long distance, then it's not a problem. And as we were talking with these guys, so this was the kind of point of the conversation, and they were like, oh, they said it's kind of an interesting idea. I don't know whether they passed it on or anything else like this. But again, from Ukrainian sources, what we're hearing is that one of the company that manufactures air-to-air missiles in US have point blank stated that they're going to be producing like thousands and thousands of missiles, and at least half of those missiles are actually going to go to Ukraine. So there's air-to-air missiles which can be carried by the Super Tucano. So like I said, these are modern missiles, they can fly for a very long time, they can take out Russian planes. They just need a carrier, something that can carry them. And so long as these small planes or something like this, or even helicopters, because Ukrainian helicopters are being sent to some company which are gonna update their targeting systems as well, like defense and targeting systems. So we can see that, you know, people stop really worrying. So despite the big talk is still about F-16s, but you know, Ukraine is not going to be able to have F-16s for at least another half a year. So that's what they say. So it's like, you know, do we really want this war to go all the way into 2026? Not really. So again, we can see that probably something's going to happen unexpected, where Ukraine is going to get something, hopefully, fingers crossed. Whether it was the result of my meeting with those guys, but I also kind of, you know, giving people credit that many people are probably way smarter than me, and that sooner or later somebody would have noticed something like this, that look, you know, it was like very similar to like if anybody watched the movie Charlie's War, that he was like, look, you know, we don't really need something, all like, you know, something super special. All we need to do is shoot down Russian helicopters. Right, that's the same kind of situation. It's like we don't need something super special. All we need is just to shoot down Russian airplanes and be able to hit the targets on the ground from long distance, from under the umbrella of the like local air defense systems like rockets and stuff like this, which are based on the ground, so that we don't have to go face to face with Russian planes and stuff like this. As long as we have the weapons that can do this, it doesn't matter what carries them, right? It doesn't matter. You can literally just, you know, if you've got the right systems and you can attach these two rockets to, I don't know, Antuku, the as we call them, kukuruznik, yeah, it's like you can attach them to one of those. I don't really care, as long as you can shoot them and knock down Russian airplanes, or like shoot them the rockets that need to be shot to take out the, I don't know, Russian military equipment on the ground, so to shoot ground targets. It doesn't matter like which plane is doing this, you know. Obviously they will talk about like other countries just giving up their old planes, and including some Soviet planes, but okay, this is kind of the result. So at this point of time, what we're hearing is that new rockets, new missiles are gonna be delivered to Ukraine to try and support them somewhere. So obviously we're expecting that the weapon systems capable of carrying those missiles are gonna appear in Ukraine, hopefully very soon, and we shall see what's the surprise in that. Okay, people, obviously some commentators, especially some people, like I said, who don't know anything about the situation in Ukraine, who just commenting things by reading some newspapers in the West, and then they commenting is like, they say, oh yeah, but look, you know, the F-16s that are being given to Ukraine first from like on the European NATO countries, are the F-16s they're writing off. It's like, yes. And this is something I have mentioned in my previous video when I was talking about the cost of supporting Ukraine. Like, you know, does it really cost that much? Essentially, if these countries get right of these F-16s, they have to do something with them. You know, it costs a lot to get rid of systems like this. So now they say, look, you know, we're buying F-35s as F-35s get delivered to us, we give you F-16s. People will say, oh look, this is like millions, if not billions of dollars worth of aid, but it's also, we have to remember this, if these planes were not sent to Ukraine, these countries would have to spend millions of euros to get rid of them safely, you know, in the right manner, you know, maybe keep them for a while. We're not sure. Like you have to look at every situation separately, but there's like, you know, a few things where they go like, well, yeah, they're doing this because, you know, so it's not gonna cost them as much as many people kind of start screaming on their YouTube channels. Right, so we talked about this, but something which was, we're gonna jump down to here. Yes, there's like, we're gonna go to Russia later because, like I say, but something to talk a bit more about Europe, and something which is like, no, not this one, this one. Right, so this is a video, and my comment is like, this is a Ukrainian commentator, Alexei Arestovich. I've showed a channel where you can watch his videos in English, but even he's usually like a very kind of nice, calm commentator, but even he was saying, look, the Europeans and the West, they're kind of fucking losing the plot. You know, they're saying one thing, they say, look, we're gonna give you this, they give this, and then they sit on their ass for like, you know, and they twiddle their thumbs up to their up their butthole for like another 6 months to take another decision. It's kind of becoming fucking ridiculous, right? And I made a comment like, look, Alexei, you're repeating everything that I said long time ago. Thank you very much. You know, finally somebody started to notice. Like, but it is true. There's a video I've made on my channel where I was said, look, you know, Ukraine won, Russia, Europe is losing, Russia lost. And in a couple of other videos I was pointing the same thing. A couple of videos I've made before the whole situation with Ukraine have started, where I was saying, look, the European and general Western leadership is kind of built up of people who have been essentially in politics since they've started. You know, they've never really done anything outside of politics, but also these are people who came into power in, like, you know, in the 90s, maybe some of them beginning of 2000s, and when they were coming into power, already then they were close to, like, you know, 40 or 50 years old. You know, it's like, so in 2023 they already, you know, you don't know whether they should have gone, my phrase was, they should have gone retired, but instead they have gone retarded, right? You know, it's like Europe and overall the West seems to be like this kind of a bunch of people like, look guys, you know, there is a point at which we have to say to politicians, sorry guys, time to move on, do something else, because these decisions take fucking ages, right? And the way Europe reacts to war in Ukraine, it shows to many other people. They say like, look guys, you know, like I said, when we talk about importance of war in Ukraine, it's not just about the war in Ukraine. It's also about like how, like, you know, if we're saying, look, you know, to the countries, look, don't buy nuclear weapons, you know, or like, you know, you don't need to build up your military to the point where your country is only spending all its money on military. You know, you have to try to develop your economy, you have to try to develop your, like, I don't know, science, you know, invest into schools and universities. We cannot say this anymore, because just the situation with Ukraine goes like, look, the West is incapable of doing anything. You know, so what's gonna happen if one African nation that has the weapons attacks another African nations that does not have the weapons? You know, Europe is gonna be sitting again. By the time they're gonna wake the fuck up, you know, and do something, it's just going to be too late. Too many people gonna die. So essentially we're looking at the possibility, or high possibility, of new armament race, but it's going to be everybody arming up against their neighbors and everybody, because the West have lost its plot essentially. Like, remember when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in the first time? You know, it was like, look, a week, 2 weeks, saying like, yep, you're done, brother. Like, you know, when shit went wrong in the, again, Eastern Europe, was it Czechoslovakia or somewhere like down there, like in Balkans, and you know, people started doing like ethnic cleansing and stuff like this. Again, like Europeans and like the West kind of acted really quickly, even though the Russians kind of joined in pretty fast. Right now you have essentially a major fucking war by somebody who is supposed to keep peace invading the nearby country just because they want to, just for the sake of internal political kind of, to solve internal political issues, right? Kill thousands of civilians, cause irreparable damage to the environment. Okay, the damage to the environment will be repaired, but it will take years to do so, causing huge damage to infrastructure, essentially creating a situation where a lot of the country is going to have to be rebuilt from scratch, and the Western politicians are still kind of worrying about on which speed should they set up the vibrator up their ass. Not much I can say about this, but you know, even Ukrainians are going like, okay guys, you know, alright, you know, we're doing the fighting, but you know, you were the ones who promised us that if we remove all our tanks, if we demilitarize our military and only have like a very small specialized force to help you out in other cases, when we're gonna give you all our nukes, you guys were the ones who promised us that we are gonna be in like, you know, in normal fighting situation. If somebody attacks us, we're gonna be protected. You know, we're gonna get some help. And now the help is coming like through a fucking drip. You know, it's like you know, when it needs to be a flood. And you know, whatever people say, when they say, oh look, the Trump or something like this, or like, look guys, you know, I'd give a chance to Trump more than I'd give a chance to the current politicians that are there, because last time I remember, when there was issue with Putin and Trump tried to resolve it peacefully and Putin told him to fuck off, Trump gave Ukraine defensive weapons. He was the one who essentially signed in the existence the anti-tank weaponry and things like this to be supplied to Ukraine. You know, it's like, yes, it wasn't much, but did it play its role? Yeah, it did, even though some of it was captured at some point of time, but a lot of it played its role and helped to stop the Russian advance. Did it play a super huge role? I don't know. Like, I wasn't there. Obviously, there's a lot of shit that Russians have done wrong in that attack. And again, Something that I was looking at the other day was an image of a conversation I had. It was about a day before the war started, because Putin has declared that there was going to be he's admitting those territories, Ukrainian territories, as part of Russia. And I was like, look, there's going to be a war. This is what's going to happen. They're going to strike from the Crimea towards Donbass, from Donbass towards Crimea, and then they're going to have a few strikes around the borders from like Russia and Belarus. They're going to have a few strikes inside the Ukraine, just to make sure that Ukrainian military is separated, and cannot act cannot act just here to stop the Russian invasion. And what did we see? Yes, there was attacks from Belarus towards Kiev, from Russia in here, and again, people say that, look, Ukrainians are fighting this war, but they shouldn't attack Russia. It's probably should, but still Ukrainians are keeping it kind of within Ukraine. It's a defensive war. But even Ukrainians are now saying, look guys, you're taking a fucking piss. So the Europe is essentially showing its inability to act. The European politicians are kind of showing that they've spent too much time building their political careers by gobbling someone's dicks and of the people above them, or eating pussy, whatever they did, and then keeping their buttocks open, right? They just too used that their political career heavily depends on their sexual service skills and whatever other kind of service skills they might have, versus actually doing things, solving problems, creating solutions, and acting as people should, right? I also pointed out in one of my videos saying that, look, like I said, the age of the politicians, I pointed that out, I was they're simply living in a different age. 1990s, I remember 1990s, they were very, very, very fucking different from even 2010s. Those are still politicians who still live in 1990s. Something I said, that Russia still lives in 1990s, not the best part of 1990s. Same stuff happens with a lot of European, and not just European, also American politicians. Oh, sorry guys. I'm talking a lot. I'm not used to that. So, we talked about this. We talked about the fact that Europeans are still scratching their heads, but also, like I said, there is hope. There is hope because the missiles are being built. So we might see some surprises, because the people who, like I said, I met those guys who were running the analytics. They were not old geezers with bushy white beards. They were actually people who quite young, quite agile, and they look at things and they were quite happy to listen to what I had to say. So we'll see what's gonna happen. I hope that meeting, a stupid thing I did, obviously, I have to admit, a stupid thing I did was we did not exchange numbers. I should have offered them to exchange numbers and have maybe more conversations with them, discuss things a bit more, keep in touch, and see how things work out. Okay, I'm stupid, I admit that, okay? I'm not a human person, okay? How do I put it? My interpersonal skills are kind of bad. I'm good at analytics, I'm good with other many things, but I'm good with working with large kind of information pools and then finding out and having kind of ways of not predicting but kind of foreseeing a little bit of things, but I'm not good with humans. So I apologize for that. I should have kept in touch, changed numbers, but stupid me, okay? I admit to being stupid, okay? But let's look again now, as we have gone through Ukraine, we've covered Europe and Europe's inability to take decisions. Like I say, the inability to kind of say, look, this is what we have to do and just fucking do it. Let's talk a little bit about Russia. This is kind of another two things we're going to talk about, is Russia and really China. Right, we're going to talk about China, but we get to that. But we're going to start from Russia, because what happened in Russia was that Wagner uprising. Is that? Okay. Okay, Wagner revolt in Russia. Yes. So essentially, what happened was that Wagner troops. It's like, you know, it's a private military company, which is essentially not private, but this is essentially a branch of Russian military which was specialized in essentially leading wars in the third world countries. So they had lots of mercenaries, ex-military, they were paid very good money, but what they were doing essentially, they were doing like dirty work which you wouldn't want Russian troops to do. So for example, if a corrupt African politician has a deal to run a diamond mine somewhere, but the locals don't want them to do something, you know, and start causing trouble, they send in the Wagner group, you know, they hire the Wagner group and they pay the Wagner group to do the dirty shit. Right, it's a pretty big group. They first been noticed by the world for what they did in Syria. You know, they're not like, you know, they're not mercenaries like in the world of days, like they just fight peaceful people. They are ex-military, right? But they had access to like a lot of Russian military equipment, so including like people carriers, tanks, you know, like quite a lot of stuff. But they mostly fought in Russia. Oh, sorry, in the kind of Africa, not Russia, third world countries. Africa, kind of like maybe a few things in South America. Right, they specialized in fighting essentially against civilian population. But they also quite, you know, according to Ukrainian commentators, they still are forced to be probably one of the most capable of Russian forces, simply because they, like, you know, the civilian population in Africa is not always just that civilian, you know, they still shoot at you. So these are the guys who had the habit of being under fire, of dealing with situations like this, maybe not as well as, like, you know, super trained units, but they were much better than the normal Russian army units who have not been seen battle for a very long time. So it's like one of the most capable units in the Russian military force. And what happened was that they have run away from Ukraine, because Ukrainian counteroffensive was going on in the east of Ukraine, so over here. Right, the Russians, the Wagner group were like fighting here, and Bakhmut, what is it? Vuhledar. So no, they were fighting. Oh, it's been a while since I looked at this map. I do apologize, but there was a lot of fighting where they were like, they essentially, I'm not gonna look for it now, but they were fighting in the east. They captured the city of Bakhmut, but as Ukrainian counteroffensive have started, right, they've essentially went like, look, you know, we're not staying here, we're fucking off. And because they went like, look, you know, Ukrainians had better positions, they have run out of the, again, during this war they were known for essentially employing lots of prisoners and getting them to come and fight in Ukraine. For if they last for 6 months, those prisoners would get, like, you know, freedom. But if they didn't fight, well, they got killed with a sledgehammer. Right, so that was going on. They essentially ran out of prisoners while taking Bakhmut. Took them like 9. Okay, there it is. Bakhmut, found it. Yes. So while taking this city, they have lost thousands and thousands of people. But as Ukrainians have started slowly advancing around the city, the Wagner group have decided, like, look, you know, the army units which are sitting here, they will run sooner or later. We don't want to stay here. We want to get out. And they go out. And they go out so fast that the speed had allowed them to go almost all the way to Moscow. So a long way from Bakhmut to Moscow. And people say, oh look, it was just intervention by Belarus president which have stopped them entering Moscow. Many Ukrainian commentators are saying, like, look, you know, this guy had a chance because Putin has fucked off out of Moscow as these guys were approaching Moscow, right? Because they've captured some buildings in a couple of cities. But as they were approaching Moscow, they were like a couple of 100 kilometers from Moscow. Putin had fucked off out of Moscow. A lot of people from his, like, surroundings have left with him. And essentially this guy, the leader of Wagner, this bold guy could essentially have gone in, captured Kremlin, nobody would have stopped him, and he could become a Russian president, essentially, apparently. Right? Yes, it's kind of right, it's kind of is good, unless you remember not this one, but this one. This is a Deutsche Welle news, but it's kind of, why are Russian oligarchs forming private armies? And that was from 2 months ago. You have to pay attention. So already 2 months ago, people started saying, hey, wait a minute, like, already Russian oligarchs forming their private armies. What is it happening? What are they doing this for? And something I've said again, I made a video a few months ago. Right, I tried to do it not as a video, but as live. Right, live after Russia. Well, the one I did in Russian was actually even longer than that. But what I was saying in this video, it was like, look guys, you know, once the war in Ukraine finishes, the Russia's gonna go to shit. Right, the Central Power, there's gonna be a lot of people coming back from the war which are gonna start causing trouble, and the Central Power is gonna lose control of the country. Right, and in those videos I essentially was describing which areas gonna, like, some areas gonna go to China, some areas gonna be captured, you know, by probably gonna join Japan, some areas gonna do this, but also there's gonna be lots of areas where there's gonna be lots of fighting by those local forces to keep control of those areas, and how that shit is gonna work out, I've got no fucking clue. And I was not talking about this again. I'm not being super clever guy who's like, oh my god, I can see the future, I can predict the future, as if, like, you know, like nobody else before me. No, I'm not saying it like this. I'm saying it like we already started talking about China. I'm saying it because I know a little bit of history. Like, you know, this history tends to repeat itself one way or the other. And all these things were happening when the last Russian Tsar was essentially thrown off his throne. And that happened by people say, oh, the Bolsheviks have removed the Russian Tsar. It's not the truth. The truth is that the last Russian Tsar has been removed from the throne by his generals, and the way they've done it was like they made him to abdicate towards his younger brother, and his younger brother has completely lost control of the country, started doing dumb shit, and then ended up running away out of Russia or getting killed. I don't remember anymore, because long time ago since I read about this stuff. But essentially, yes. So when the last Tsar was knocked off by his own generals, and then until the arrival of Bolsheviks, the country has essentially fell apart into little pieces, and people were saying that, look, at some point of time, just in one region, there was like 30 socialist republics. So every village was becoming a republic. Like, it was becoming ridiculous. Right? This story is going to repeat itself in one way or the other. So, and the guys from Wagner, he's not like, he feels that knows he will not be able to control all these people at the moment at this point of time. Putin has been able to control the dealings between different fractions and stuff like this, but we also hear that Chechen fighters, like the part of the Chechen president force, is returning to Chechnya. The guy apparently has gotten ill and cannot leave cannot leave Ramzan Kadyrov. He cannot apparently leave Chechnya anymore because he's apparently ill. But essentially what I was saying in my video was saying, like, look, Chechnya is gonna have this kind of stuff going on there, and what we're seeing is essentially people trying to collect forces to keep. They see the same thing I've seen. Right, so, I mean, like I said, I'm pretty smart when it comes to analysis, but I'm not the only guy like this. And what they're seeing is that they're losing the war, and once the war ends, like, Putin is gonna get probably shot or something like this. The Belarus president probably gonna disappear somewhere in the Belarus woods. But these guys are essentially building up their already own forces to be able to hold up at least onto something. And as we're looking, okay, right, this is a video by Russian commentators, Dmitry Potapenko, sorry. And he is actually like, he lives in Russia, he runs like some businesses in Russia, and he works with a lot of businesses in Russia, so a lot of commentary he does about Russia is actually quite spot on. So again, this is not me talking about stuff, like, I'm not just magically making shit up. And these guys, they literally just made a video one day ago as I'm filming that. You see, right, so one day ago, so just came up. And essentially they're already saying that apparently they've made it so that the Russian legal system said, well, there was no uprising. Like, these people that are supposed to actually be sent to jail, they said, nope, nothing happened. Like, it was just kind of misunderstanding. We told these troops to come back. They were on a trip just to see Moscow. And that there was no buildings captured. Nobody died. Nothing happened. Like, And those Wagner troops have been sent to their main areas of locations. So where they've been, like, main cities where they stayed, they've been sent over there. We're not gonna put it past them that some people are being brought back from, like, Africa and stuff like this. They're finding their way back. Essentially what we're seeing is the local elites wanting to have those prepared troops, especially the troops that are ready to shoot at the civilians, like Wagner group, whose last
I don't know, 20 years or so, and they have been essentially doing just that, like against like suppressing the civilian uprisings in some African countries, or like, you know, for some corrupt politicians, essentially, if there was some corruption going on, and it need to be like reinforced by military presence. These were the guys that were present there, so like, you know, they were doing lots of illegal shit, like, you know, including transporting drugs, including transporting diamonds from like regions where they're not supposed to be coming out of. All that stuff, essentially, this is why a lot of African politicians, like, you know, was like, okay, well, you know, when was it that you started becoming rich? Oh, when you made the deal with the Wagner group, and now you're supporting Russian president. Let me guess why, you know, like. But yes, so Wagner group is brought its soldiers out of Ukraine already, and I suspect that is in preparation to the fact that they understand that the Russian military that is in Ukraine, although they're holding it, because obviously if you're in a battle and somebody's shooting at you, you're gonna shoot back. It doesn't matter, like, you know, it's just a natural instinct. Like, you know, I want to live, and if somebody's shooting at me, I'm shooting at them, right? I'm not claiming that, you know, higher moral qualities than a normal human being. So if I was in a battle, whether it was a right side or a wrong side, but if people were shooting at me, throwing grenades and stuff like this, I'd be fighting back. But at some point of time, because we hear from you, at least from Ukrainian side, but even from some like Russian sources, which say that, look, you know, what Ukrainians are doing now, they're not just taking out ammunition and decision-taking centers, but they started to take out like weapon systems, and so the Russians are losing more artillery now. They're also losing, like, obviously tanks. It was an interesting video, yes. So this is from 2 months ago, a video by Kahovka, where these guys calculated how many tanks there are in Russia and how many have been spent already. Okay. So yeah, he's like looking into like, so he does a lot of like technical reviews why things are going the way they're going. So it's actually not a bad channel to watch if you're interested about this kind of subjects. But yeah, he also calculated how many tanks Russia has and covers also some other things. But yes, as we're seeing that, like, look, you know, what we're seeing is essentially, I think, preparation for what happens after the war. So this is why the guy who, the Prigozhin, yeah, this bold motherfucker, alright, this is why he didn't want to sit in Kremlin, because what he understood, I think, or what was explained to him is like, look, mate, you know, you go there, you have to deal with these bastards. Do you want to do this? He was like, nope, not really. So as long as we can get away with this as a mistake, you know, we're happy. I'm happy to just get out. I'm not dealing with these people. You know, as long as I'm prepared for what is coming after the war. And they're getting ready for what is coming after the war. Right? And what is coming after the war, as I said in my previous video, is the fact that China is probably looking at capturing a big chunk of Russia. And when people talk about China capturing Taiwan, it's a kind of fool's errand. It's actually also an interesting story. I was at my friend's place. The husband and wife, they're from Russia, right? I've known them for a very long time, from way before the Russian invasion. You know, it's like they do not support Russia. They support Ukraine. They want this war to finish. They want Russian soldiers to go back home. And we started talking obviously about the threat of China, and they were like, well, what will happen? And that's especially like the wife was like, okay, but what about China invading Taiwan? And I was like, look, China is not going to invade Taiwan in any foreseeable future. Because like I say, it's a fool's errand, right? and the guy was like, look, you know what? He took a red like marker pen and essentially they got a white wall and he said, look, China not invading Taiwan, Yuri and the date. So like we wrote down my predictions. Like essentially what China is looking for, China has a lot of problems right now, right? So getting into the war is not something, with Taiwan is not something China wants. Right, they have, obviously many people talk about how China produces that and does that and does that, and quite often it's like, okay, you open a channel which is being run by China people, some Chinese people and who actually know the area or who speak Chinese and get their sources from China. So they say, look, you know, there's a guy, I think he's a British guy, runs his channel, and then he says, look, this is a channel by a Chinese guy and this is the video he makes. Or so again, like people who know this stuff, so it's like they bring in the news from there, and it's not good for China. And the problem China has right now as well is they don't have enough farmlands, like, you know, China lack of farmlands. Yeah. What you see is like this is they're not producing enough food to feed their people. They essentially have a spreading desert. So this is like this area of China. Right, if you look at this, yeah, these are agricultural lands, but with the amount of population which mostly lives here, down the coast, actually down the south coast, right, less and less people living here, like they're not producing enough food to feed nearly 1 billion people. So if problems start happening in Ukraine and Ukraine cannot supply food to China as well as Russia, yeah, China is in a bit of trouble. They are in a bit of trouble economically because something I have said, oh, God knows how many years ago, but I was saying that what was happening in China is they were not producing enough internal consumers. Essentially, their economy was like, and just a video I've done recently, but I've done it long time ago. It was like about 2017. I was saying that look, the Western companies that were moving all those jobs to like China and India, they were not essentially producing because they were paying so little. They were essentially not producing new consumers. So they were removing the consumers in the West, but they were not producing new consumers in China. So there was no real exchange, and what is happening is come to bite the Chinese government in the backside. Essentially, there is a small amount of people, okay, nearly 100 million of those people, right? So good 10% of population who like quite rich, but 90% of the population cannot buy the products that they produce to sell in the West. And people will say, oh my God, it's 100 million. It's like, no, for a country of over 1 billion people, it's a very big problem. They're not producing having enough money. This means they cannot really invest properly into local people, not having money. The farmers not having the money, they cannot produce in proper agriculture, right? They cannot build it up. But the problem they also have is that this area over here, like essentially to the east, away from the kind of green, they have essentially a desert there. And the problem with the desert is the fact that there is no water. But if we look at the map of China/Russia, we're gonna, yeah, political. So if we look at this map, let's say, okay, that's kind of weird. Okay, let's open this a new tab. Okay, see this where the China connects to Russia, also Mongolia. Like Mongolia, again, it's not super agricultural country. The climate there is very, how do they call it, continental climate. So essentially they have hot summers, cold winters, right? Because there's no sea, nothing to kind of level it out as we have it around many areas of Europe. I mean, Mongolia is probably bigger than half of the European countries put together, but has next to zero population, like, you know, a few dozen million. China, most of the population lives like kind of over here, right? If you see my mouse moving, so it's kind of southeast, and then some kind of up here, but the more further north you go, the less. But for a very long time, China, these territories of Russia, like all the way to kind of Yakutsk there, like they were actually under the Chinese control or under the tribes which were like closely connected to China. And those areas are full of water, right? We're already seeing that the Chinese were like building pipes and essentially bringing water from those areas up north, so like from up north here to, okay, let's just see if we can make it closer. So yeah, from the areas like here, Irkutsk, Ulanu there, from those areas, from the Baikal Lake, and there's some rivers there, and essentially kind of bringing them all the way to like the deserted areas. Like obviously it's not a super great solution, but at least some solution to start bringing water and trying to kind of rebuild the what used to be like, this used to be kind of farmlands, but now it has all slowly turned into the desert, and they're trying to reclaim parts of the desert, but it always depends on whatever other crazy thing the dictator is gonna, you know, the party is gonna come up with some other crazy idea, next crazy idea, and next crazy idea, and how that shit is gonna work out. And quite often it's not really working out very well. But China has a lot of economic troubles, so getting into the war with Taiwan, essentially having to take a lot of their troops across the ocean, right? Even if they have the ships. I mean, Taiwan is not very big, but the terrain on Taiwan is such that they can defend it for a very long time, and they have the weapons. Like they have at the moment more modern weapons than Ukraine had. And people will say, but the China also has those really modern weapons, and the level of the modern weapons of China is probably even lower than the modern weapons in Russia, right? The only thing is that there is a bit more of them, so that's what. But again, if they want to capture Taiwan, they don't want a burned land. So it's not like Russia in Ukraine, where they say, look, you know, if we don't have it, we're at least gonna destroy it. Like, you know, this is why the Russians shoot against, like, you know, normal cities, just to keep Ukrainian air defense units spread out the country, because if they shoot against peaceful cities, you know, they don't care about population, like about civilian population, as long as all they care about is keeping their planes intact. Well, China, if they want to capture Taiwan, they want to capture Taiwan with the people and with the factories and everything else in there, with the equipment in there. They don't want just a barren island in the middle of the ocean. that's not why they might even consider going to Taiwan. But now they're preparing their military. I mean, their military had problems with while dealing with Indians. You see this area here, right? Which is kind of it's disputed area between Indians and Chinese. And there was an incident there like about a year ago or so where there's like Chinese troops tried doing something, and the Indians, they just came in, they took out their sticks and said, look, my stick is bigger than yours, so why don't you fuck off? And the Chinese troops went like, yep, your stick is bigger than mine, so I am fucking off. Right, that's the level of Chinese military. So they're kind of, if they're forced to defend their land, they probably will. But like I said, you know, if somebody invades your country, or like you're part of the military who does the fighting, like, yes, okay, you kind of fight, you know, you don't have a choice. But if you have to take the troops and start sending them to Taiwan, which is more than prepared to defend itself, more than that, like, even if it's going to take ages, but, you know, US and Europe will find a way to come help it out. I'm not sure Chinese are willing to risk that for a small island. Like I say, unless they can capture all the technologies and all the professionals. So essentially they have to find a way of capturing the island within a space of, I don't know, a few hours, and without destroying the infrastructure, which China is not capable of. Even if they send, like, I don't know, 2 million troops in there, like, they don't have the ships, like, to send them there. They don't have the areas where they can land safely, like, you know, without losing most of their ships, and they don't have the planes to just fly in and land there. So, like I say, it's kind of a very questionable thing. But the part where Chinese say, look, you know, these areas over here, they've already released the maps which give those cities and places the old Chinese names. Essentially, they printed maps in China which give those areas old Chinese names, should really tell us a bunch. And that bunch should sound about like, well, Chinese are planning the war, but they're not planning the war with Taiwan. Okay? And again, they need the place, the land where they can grow stuff. They don't really, like I say, a small island in the middle of nowhere is not helping them in any way or matter. Okay, so we covered this. As I said, we're not going to talk about full-on economics. This is just kind of a review. So, but actually speaking about China, one of the reasons I think that, you know, China is not really overly supportive of Russia now as well is they did make a deal a few years back to be able, and they've rented like a whole bunch of area over here. Essentially, they've rented it for a very, very cheap price. Essentially, they were given the use of land. They could send their people there, and people who actually live in those areas quite often say that in many places outside a couple of big cities, like many villages and small towns, there's more Chinese people there already than, like, you know, Russians or whatever native tribe lives there. Right, so I think I'm not saying that it's 100% sure, but what Chinese leader wanted last time he was in Russia, and this is why, you know, at the moment they're not really too supportive of Russian stance and actually started moving towards the Western stance, is they wanted to get more territories as so in rent, but the rent is like 100 odd years. So essentially they wanted probably even like, they probably have like this area here, because this is where the most losses in the forest and stuff like this. There's a lot of stuff going there wrong, but they probably wanted even more, maybe further north and probably all the way to Novosibirsk. Okay, so I'm not saying it's 100%, but it's very likely that the Chinese were like, hey, if you want our help, we really wouldn't mind getting a bit more use of the land. But we don't know what happened there. Like I say, I did not hold the candle. I can only assume that. So, again, we're not going to have the war with Taiwan, but we will see as the Russia falls apart, we will probably see a big Chinese contingent going up to that area. And like I said, they do need that area. Not just for resources, not just for the water, but also to get more younger people, because the age to which people live in those areas is much lower than in China. So on average, people there are younger. So they might have more people willing to have children over there. And as people look out after other commentators, people already started saying that China has a crisis in the fact that their population has aged. They're probably beaten Japan already at the age of, how fast their overall population is aging. A major reason for this is not just the part where the less young people were born over the years, but also more Chinese people are essentially moving out of China. So they're losing young people left, right and center. The professionals will run away to Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, to US, Europe. So there's more like a big Chinese commune being built up in Europe, in Berlin. There's a small area where there's like a Chinese place with shops, market and stuff like this. So we have all that. So overall, I think we kind of covered most of it. Like I say, I'm not guaranteeing you that I'm 100% right, but that's the way I see things are gonna move, right? Like I say, there's a lot of channels who do day-to-day kind of cover of Ukraine, except the one we looked at. So for example, Denis Davidov, he makes a lot of interesting 15-minute videos on daily basis. What are those guys? Oh yeah, here's the picture I mentioned before. Yeah, this is my prediction. Right, by summer there will be war. There will be two main strikes towards each other from Crimea and Lugandonia, with probably landing their Marines somewhere in Mariupol to capture the port, and a few strikes to distract Ukrainians on the borders of Ukraine with Russia and Belarus. From these strikes there will be a few thousands of Russian conscripts are going to burn in these strikes, and the Ukrainians are going to be accused in the treachery of the brotherly nation. And then they will tell the Russians that they should really kind of tighten their belts, and the Moscow is encircled by their enemies. So that's exactly what was happening over the last time. Many Russian people were like, look, again, I know I'm a bit wondering, but just recently I was talking with somebody I know, a person who lives in England but is from Russia, and was telling me about how their father was sending them the videos about how the Europe hates Russia. I was like, you live in England, right? You tried going to Russia, you lived in Russia, you didn't like it, you moved back to England, right? How many people in England hate you because you're Russian? How many people in England actually hate Russia? Not many. But they would say, look, why wouldn't Ukrainians want to live join Russia again? I was like, look, again, you live in England, why don't you want to go back to Russia? It's like, well, because I didn't really like it. It wasn't my thing. It was like, again, why do you expect Ukrainians who have more access to Europe. Like they had bigger access than Russians during the World Cup, was it Euro Cup for football. So they have high access to these areas. They have visa-free travel to European countries. They can go and see places. So they lost the pink and red glasses over Europe. So like, you know, they have increasingly lost the glasses where their Europe is all perfect, but they also lost that kind of attitude that, you know, like, you know, if my elevator stinks of piss, it's because Obama went there and did his did. No, if your elevator stinks of something, that's probably one of your neighbors or probably even you, right? Because when you were drunk. But, you know, Americans don't want to go to Russia and kill Russians. Nobody in Europe wants to go to Russia and kill Russians. Like, everybody's happy with Russia being Russian, right? But apparently, according to many Russian people who even live in the West, they can tell you that how the West hates Russia. Well, I can't help it. Right, so, but like I said, there's a lot of channels like this guy, Denis Davidov, Starsky, I think that's the guy. Operator Starsky, again, I think this is a Ukrainian guy who does videos about situations in Ukraine. So like I said, there's quite a few channels. I'll actually try and put them, reporting from Ukraine, I'll try and put them all in the description of this video. So if you blasted through this place, yes. Like there's a lot of channels. This is a Latvian guy, I think. But again, he knows the language, he knows history, like, you know. So he also puts in some interesting stories. This is UA TV, so yeah, UA Ukrainian television in English. So I'll put a list of this channel and put them in the description of the video. And all of those channels are essentially cut, but they're giving you like events, but they don't try to look a bit deeper. So like, you know, you have small videos like, you know, 26 minutes where they go through all the channels and stuff like this, you know, just describing, yeah, digital Gulag FSB databases like Russian Special Services collect. So yeah, something like this, you know, you get news, but these are the channels of people who know the areas. I don't watch all of them every day, obviously, but I do watch some of their videos. Some of the subjects I cover in this analytics kind of, but a lot of them essentially kind of concentrating on like particular type of analytics, not on wider analytics, and not kind of talking about things that I'm trying to talk about. But I think there's a lot of stuff you can learn from them. It's all like people things doing in English. So, but it's better than watching people like, say, a lot of commentators from the West who don't watch these channels. They, even though they're in English, they will pick up something like from one English language newspaper, something which was written by an analyst who's only English speaker or whatever, only French speaker, who again has never watched any of these channels, doesn't have any idea about the history, doesn't have any idea about the culture, has zero understanding of what's actually happening on the ground, but would write something and these guys was going to talk about something and you go like, wait a minute, like you got no idea what you're talking about. Okay, so, okay, anyways, I've been talking for quite a long time, so I'm going to end now. Thank you for listening to me, even though I trailed. If you managed to get to this area, I will put all of this channel into video description. Hopefully you're gonna see this, and even if you don't watch this video, even if you did not get to this part, hopefully you will be able to find these links and watch all these channels, get the news from the people who are actually more aware of the things that are happening in Ukraine and how it all influences like the East, the West, and the rest of the world. Okay? Alright guys, thank you very much. I think I'm done for today. I hope this whole thing finishes soon. I hope less people are gonna die. I don't really wish on Russia what I think is gonna happen there. Like I say, I'm probably gonna agree with the President Trump. I just want people to stop dying and Russians to fuck off home. So, thank you very much. Goodbye.